Okay, well, it's good to have each of you here today. I'm pleased to share with you the presentation by Pete Baran on accountability. For those of you who don't know Pete, Pete is Alberta's business mechanic and owner of Blue Neck Consulting. Pete has worked with both Fortune 500 companies as well as smaller, medium-sized companies in a variety of roles from management, executive, and board positions. He has worked with companies such as Canadian Tire, Mark's Work Warehouse, IBM, HP, Fujitsu Consulting, which are, of course, Canadian companies. But in 2012, Pete decided to pack his bags and leave those big companies and experience to go back to his roots to help family-owned businesses. That's really who made him who he is today, and that's what he wants to do ongoing, and has been serving now as a coach, but not an average business coach, a very talented and experienced one. Pete now coaches, advises, and teaches business owners on how to transition from doing. He has a degree in commerce from the University of BC and a certificate in high performance leadership from Cornell University. Pete serves as the chairman of our board for CCBF and so plays a vital role in the success and the vision for our ministry. So we welcome you, Pete. Now, just as you join us, let me just pray for us. Father, I thank you for Pete. I thank you for his leadership in so many different areas, both in the community and the larger country and also in our work at CCBF. I pray your blessing over him now as he shares what he's prepared for us on accountability. Thank you for his creative thinking and his ways, the ways in which he stimulates us to think beyond what we've thought before. I pray that you'll speak to each one of us today in areas where we need to respond with changes and with action, be more effective in our respective workplaces. In your name we pray. Pete, it's all yours.
Thanks, Don. I first of all want to thank everybody for making time to attend this presentation today, and I'd like to also welcome everybody who's watching this in the recorded mode as well. I am always humbled that anybody wants to listen to me for anything at all. I have lots of credentials in the business world, as Don has mentioned. I do not have a degree in theology. I've never written a book on religious teachings. I have no background in this other than a love for Jesus. And, I'm going to do my best to share some insights, I think, in accountability, particularly as it crosses the bridge from a Christian world into a secular business environment. Because accountability is one of those words that has a lot of emotion attached to it to people, and not all of it is good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to rethink that a bit. So let's talk about some people who actually know what they're talking about when it comes to accountability. Some great quotes up there. There is a lot, that has been covered on the concept of accountability and why it's important from very different perspectives. And I think, from a Christian perspective, a lot of the work that we talk about in accountability has to do with confessing that we've done something wrong and be accountable for what we've done wrong, to repent that and to ask forgiveness. And I think that is a very common way of thinking about accountability. Is it's something that we have to take accountability for what we've done that is often bad. And, we are sinful creatures, and sometimes we fall into sin, and we have to recognize that we've done something wrong. We've hurt somebody. We've done something that is displeasing to God, and we have to fess up to it, and we have to repent and ask forgiveness. But if you look at one of the quotes on Thomas Paine above, it hints that there is something else here, that accountability, it says people who are accountable to no one should not be trusted by anyone. And it's a little bit paraphrased because, the 1700s language was a little bit different than we are today, but it points to accountability to something that's important and not just something that is a requirement to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Why is accountability important? I believe firmly that accountability is the foundation of all ethical behavior. If you are trying to do something good and you don't want to be accountable for it, then you're not really going to behave with a conviction towards an ethical and moral way of doing things. So we can escape this idea in a secular world, and people do it all the time. They escape accountability, plausible deniability. There are legal standards that allow people to slip under the bar from time to time and get away with things. And so many people try to escape accountability in a secular and a work world that is not healthy. You know, when we're looking at it from a Christian perspective, we can never escape accountability. God knows what we're doing. And the advantage I think we have as Christians in being able to step up into moral and ethical behavior is that we do have this fundamental knowledge that we are inescapable from our Creator, and that our Creator knows what we're doing, even when we don't want Him to be. That also gives us an ability to step into ethical and moral behavior in a way that a non-believer can often struggle. Let's talk about accountability, not just as something that admits our sin and requires forgiveness, but let's talk about it from a different perspective. But to do that, I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about how many of us have learned our first lessons of accountability. I'm going to share my own personal experience as an 8-year-old. So as an 8-year-old, I had a younger brother, and we were very close in age. And the two of us were kind of little boys that were rough and tumble, and we wrestled and fought and, you know, ran around like hooligans from time to time. And occasionally we would break things that my mom, our mom, didn't want us to break. In my 8-year-old brain, here's my lesson about accountability that had to change as I grew up. One time we actually broke a lamp, and it's kind of classic problem, but you know, yeah, we did it. We wrestled around in a small room and knocked over a table and broke a lamp. And of course, mom comes in the door when she hears the noise and says, "Well, who broke the lamp?" So the first thing you really want to do, you want to figure out how to accountability, because you know that something not good is going to happen as a result of breaking the lamp. The consequence is not going to be positive. So the first thing you learn is that confessing what you've done leads to a negative consequence. In my 8-year-old brain starts to connect that accountability is a bad thing because it results in bad consequences. And that's pretty natural, I think, for a lot of kids that are young, that are learning their first lessons in accountability. And I think as parents, sometimes we aren't aware that we're imprinting that deeply on people, that accountability is not a good thing. If we're going to look at accountability in an 8-year-old brain, the next question I ever had was, it's now inescapable. How do I get out of this? Getting out of it, part of it is I want to get out of the punishment that's going to accrue from that. So how do I go about doing that? Again, what I'm learning as an 8-year-old is that not only is accountability something that I don't want to fess up to, but if I have to be accountable, I want to somehow avoid the punishment. All of this thing creates this formation in my mind that said, I don't really want to be accountable, because accountability leads to negative consequences when things don't turn out well. I find in my coaching environment, a lot of people hire employees that still have that deep imprinting from those 8-year-old experiences, and they don't really want to take on accountability. They don't want that because of exactly the same reasons I've just set out. Accountability means if something goes wrong, the guns are going to swing towards me, and something bad's going to happen, and I don't really want the punishment as a result of that. Don't make me accountable. I'm just here to do my job. Find somebody else. That's not how to create a really healthy team. Healthy teams are not made of people who avoid accountability. Healthy teams are made out of people that are accountable for things. But you have to start rethinking what the definition of accountability is all about and what it really means to move away from an unhealthy perspective of accountability to something that is really healthy. So let me kind of give you a different way to do this. And what I call it is flipping the game. We've got to move away from punishment, which is, as people working in a community or within a team or within a business, even within a religious organization, or with the biz groups who we're looking at. We got to stop the concept of accountability to say, if something goes wrong, who did this? Who do I blame so that I can reprimand them because something went really wrong? I'm not saying anybody on this particular presentation goes that way, and we all try not to. But I can tell you that that's a pervasive way of thinking for many people that I bump into. And as Christians, we have to be aware that this is what the experience is of many people out there when talking about accountability. It's about saying, if I'm accountable and something went wrong, then I'm going to be seen less of as a human being, as an employee, be jeopardizing my raise. I might be jeopardizing my career or even my job. So some of these consequences can be very, very powerfully negative. The idea here is that this perspective of accountability is about creating and becoming scapegoats. I don't really want to be accountable, but I'm going to make somebody accountable so that I don't get punished. That's a scapegoat. It creates an isolation from an obligation. I don't want to be, I want to step away. I want to be isolated because then I stay out of trouble. It also says, when somebody asks me to be accountable or take something on, are they setting me up for failure? Knowing that when I fall short of expectations, I am likely to get reprimanded or punished. This is unfortunately a fairly common secular view of accountability. I don't know about you, but there is almost nothing really positive about what I just described. The only way we're going to get, things changed is to rethink our concept of accountability and how we work with it. Whether or not we work with it in our own families, or whether we work with it in our jobs, or whether we work with it in a religious, I have to think of accountability completely different. What I'm going to suggest here is that it's an accountability concept that is closer to God's original concept of accountability, than the secular version that we've got. What I'm going to suggest here is that what we do is we change from a fearful culture that avoids stepping up to things to a culture of praise. So think about an accountability not as an obligation, but as a gift, an honor, a commission that you're asking somebody to take on that is important, and that you take it on because you have faith in that person's abilities and worthiness. Not that you're setting them up for a scapegoat. You're setting them up for success, and you desperately need them to be successful. I'm watching some of the NHL playoffs right now. One of the worst positions I would ever want to be accountable for is being a goalie. The person who takes on that position takes on a massive accountability that sometimes the press is and the fans aren't appreciative of. That person is in goal to stop the other team from winning because the team has faith in that person. They believe that they're going to do a wonderful job and that they have the skills and capability and training and motivation and desire to not let the team down. The team believes that, and that's why they're in goal. And I think when you're looking at creating a healthy perspective accountability, we need somebody we can count on, and we want it to be you. Shift now also becomes part of not isolation, but becoming part of a community, a part of a team, part of an organization, something valued. We want and need to succeed so that we all succeed. And it's a mutual acceptance of that challenge, and also the potential risk of failure. If you fail, we all fail. If you succeed, we are all part of that success. And if things are going wrong, we will come alongside you and help you to succeed. We will not step away from you. We are in this together. And even though somebody can be accountable for a role and a commission within that organization, it doesn't mean that they're now alone. They are now part of the organization. Very different way of thinking about things. You want them and need them to succeed, and then you're also going to recognize progress that they make. And as an employer, or a boss or a supervisor or somebody who's part of the team, one of the most powerful things I found that you can always do with somebody who has an accountability is to show recognition that they are trying and making progress. Not that they fell short, but that they're attempting to raise their capabilities to meet the bar. And even though they may not be able to make it all the time, the recognition and appreciation for the effort, the genuine effort, is part of supporting somebody who's taken on that commission, taken on that accountability. And I think that's a very different way of looking at accountability from what most of the world sees as accountability. And what we've learned as children is associated with accountability. We need to change that. You know, as leaders in a Christian in Christ, or as leaders at work, we need to start looking at accountability not as something to find punishment with that requires, you know, contrition, but something that is accountability, that is an honor and is a part of the team because we believe in you. And so it now becomes something very different from where I think the world is often going with accountability. This also tends to result in a really highly productive and confident, whether that's a religious organization, a community, whether that's a work organization, or even a family. If you look at building people up through accountability, then you're also creating a very productive organization full of confident people that if they know that they're being asked to do something because people trust them and have faith in them, and that the people around them will rally around them and support them, which creates a huge amount of confidence in the organization, whatever that organization is. If I kind of take it a little bit further, I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy here. This is a picture that I've never in my life want to actually live. Although I love hiking at high levels, I am terrified of exposure like this. Nevertheless, hundreds of people have done this hike. This is the top of the Eiger in Switzerland. It's a very famous ridge that literally drops down for thousands of feet on either side. The people that hike this are roped together. They are roped together because they have a shared accountability for each other's survival and success on this hike. Let me tell you what happens, what everybody knows is supposed to happen when somebody is roped together on this. And I have gone over areas where there are potential crevasses, and the same thing kind of happens. If somebody falls off one side, they are trusting that the other person they're roped to will throw themselves off the other side, because that's the only way to survive. Think about that for a second. That is an accountability to save another person's life by making a decision that could end yours. It doesn't get a whole lot more real than that. And that accountability is something that you all share when you do this. It means that for us to all succeed, we all have to do what we're accountable for. And that changes this entire thing. I'm not roped to you, and if you fall, you're dead, but I'll survive. If you fall, I will risk my life to save yours. It means we're all staying connected and we're sharing the load together. We're sharing the risk together. We're also going to share the success of summiting together. And although in real life, we may not ever in our lifetime have these experiences, there are so many experiences every day that if we're really going to do something great, and we're going to do something that's going to truly honor God and change the world and the lives around us, I want you to hold on to this picture of traversing the Eiger and saying, this is my Eiger. This is where I need to rope together with somebody, and we're going to summit together, and we're going to do this with a joint accountability to each other to do something amazing and great, and give each other the confidence to do something that we may not have the confidence to do alone. This is where I think the real beauty of accountability can get revealed. And I believe it's the version of accountability that God wants us to understand, that it isn't just about confessing, repenting, and asking forgiveness. It's about taking on a grand mission together with others under the eyes and watch of God and doing something that is truly amazing that we can only do when we take on accountabilities together. A couple of challenges that always come out of this. Beautiful picture. How does this kind of move into some of the challenges of the real world? Well, one of the big challenges is going to be taking on accountabilities in the world that may be in conflict with God's commands. During my professional career, where I was working with very large Fortune 500 companies that were driven by quarterly, reports and public disclosures every 90 days. There are all sorts of accountabilities that I had come into conflict with where I believe God wants us to do and how he wants us to act. In the real world, we're all going to face things where people ask us to take on accountabilities to do things that we don't believe are the right things to do. The question is going to be, how do you take that on? And all of us have to kind of answer those questions for ourselves and eventually be accountable for God, as it was in that Matthew quote at the beginning of this presentation, because God's watching. For me, I spent years trying to accommodate, sidestep, work around, adjust, flex, figure out how to bring those things together. And eventually I just quit the Fortune 500 world because it was too stressful for me to try and continue to do that. Was that the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? For me, it was the right thing to do. For all of us, we have to make our own decisions and decide how we want to be answerable to God at the end of the day. The second big challenge that I see often is false accusations of accountabilities. Back to the 8-year-old mind, my brother did it. I didn't do it. Always echoes back to Genesis as well. Am I my brother's keeper? We try to accuse other people of things and to dodge our accountabilities. And even if we don't, others will try to put it on us. How do we want to respond to those kinds of situations when somebody is trying to make us accountability for something that we didn't do and we weren't accountable for? Those are really tough things to do. My own, first inclination is always to deny and to argue it back and to bring truth to the situation. However, learn that there are times where that's maybe not the wisest thing to do. Sometimes the wisest thing to do is to take accountability and to take the punishment for somebody else who can't handle the punishment. These are things that Christ has done for us. So why would we not do that for our own brothers and sisters? Sometimes it is bringing truth to the table because we need to deal with the issue. And every situation has to be thought through, I think, intentionally to say, what is the correct thing to do here when we are falsely accused? The other thing is often opportunities that are handed to us to escape our accountability. Somebody else clearly contributed to a failure that you're accountable for, and it would be easy to blame them. When I look at the definition of accountability, it means that I'm accountable no matter. And so if somebody else created a problem that I'm accountable for, it does not take away my accountability. And the reason being is that somebody has entrusted me to make something happen. Woe is me that somebody else got in the way of that messed it up, that I wasn't able to control something that was uncontrollable, that I failed to see a risk that emerged. If we are accountable, we have to step forward and say, this didn't work. It was my responsibility to do it. And here's what happened, but I'm going to remain accountable and accept whatever consequences come from that. Because that's part of the reason of being accountable. It means if you're accountable, you're not going to dodge the accountability. Lots of other things to think about as you go through your life and your days about accountability. I hope that this talk has done a couple of things. One of them is to give you a different perspective of how to think about accountability as something that is honorable and something that acknowledges that somebody has trust and faith in us. God asks us to do things on a regular basis because he has trust and faith in us. And he comes alongside of us to help us to succeed. It's a beautiful example of what he's asking us to do with other people. Take on accountability, ask other people in honor to be accountable and become part of the team, to come alongside of them and help them to succeed so that we can accomplish something amazing. Recognizing that in the secular world that we live in, which is imperfect and filled with people that have different motivations, different value sets than perhaps we do, that there are going to be lots of challenges in sorting out what the right thing to do is with accountability. But I encourage you to think about it and to see if you can start changing other people's perceptions of what accountability is all about, because I still believe it's core and critical things that are required in being able to do great things for, in the name of Jesus. That's it for my talk today. I'm going to turn it over to Don at this point and see if we want to start a little bit of conversation, ask a few questions, stimulate a little bit of conversation, and kind of round out the meeting.
Thanks, Pete, for an excellent presentation. Like I said at the outset, you've got a way of helping us flip the game and see through a little different lens. That's been helpful today. Why don't we open it up for comments, responses, food for thought, illustrations, stories from your own life of accountability.
Yeah. Has anybody else had bumped into people who really don't want to be accountable for much? Everybody likes to step up to accountability and take. Gary.
No, definitely. I mean, when you ask that question, I think back to the many years that I spent in a large organization, and it's a little mind-boggling to be honest. I mean, I don't know how it is in other large organizations because this was the only large organization that I worked for, but people who don't want to be accountable, it's really prevalent. And I think, I do think it's tied to this sense of responsibility. I also think it comes down at the root of it. There's a sense of fear, I think. I think that when people are afraid to take accountability and afraid to take responsibility, it's a fear of making mistakes. And if we can help people get over the fear of making mistakes, I think we might see people a little more willing to take things on and take a little more responsibility. And like you said, the whole concept of contribution from a team perspective is really helpful.
Did you also find that the culture in that large organization that shall remain nameless, that the culture was that if you made a mistake that you would be punished for it, or there would be a reprimand, and there would be some people thinking less of you for doing it?
Yeah, I think so. And actually, even, I'm thinking of other smaller organizations or smaller companies that I've worked with as well. And I don't think it is just tied to a large organization. I can think of another place I worked that probably only had about 30 employees. And it just seemed, there was a really decisive line between sort of the upper management, those with decision-making responsibilities, and then those without. And those without were very, very quick, right, to just not only not take responsibilities, for large decisions affecting the company, but even just really being firm and drawing that line of that's beyond me. I'm not making a decision, or I'm not taking responsibility for that, and just sort of doing what they were told or asked to do, as opposed to being comfortable or being given that room to take on some responsibility in a way that they would be comfortable with. So again, I think it comes down a lot of time to just the comfort. And you're right, like the repercussions is a big part of it. But I think, there are some workplaces that I've come upon. I can think of one in particular where they've really embraced this concept of failing as being a way to learn, and that when one person fails, we all fail, but we all learn. And there's this motto from one of the leaders at that company about we fail fast. And so we all fail fast. We all recognize we're going to fail. And when we fail, we're going to learn from it, but then we fail fast and we move on. So I found that really helpful to hear him speak on that.
That's really important. And you know what? There's so many organizations really do mess that up. I was listening a little bit to the congressional hearings where the CEO of Boeing is being held to account for all the crashes and failures. And what's coming out is a culture of covering up mistakes because nobody wants to be accountable for them. And maybe I'm projecting a little bit because I'm doing this talk today. I couldn't help but thinking that there were whistleblowers that said there are problems here and brought that up to their superiors, were shut down. There were errors that were made that ended up in door bolts being missing in a plane, and famously the hatch blew out at several thousand feet. There are some huge consequences to it. And at the end of the day, it's there where everybody is avoiding accountability for what's going on or what the person next to them is doing or not doing. Even up to an organization as large and as established and as storied as Boeing, these things can be really dangerous. Lack of accountability creates all sorts of serious problems that can impact people's lives. The answer to it is changing the culture, changing the approach to and feeling of what accountability is. I think that's part of the answer.
Pete, I want to say thank you for your presentation. When you asked the question, if any of us had any contact with people that didn't want to be accountable, I was trying to unmute myself and it wouldn't unmute. And then all of a sudden it worked. So having worked in the educational world for many years, there's a lot of that goes on. Students do not want to be accountable for their lack of commitment to fulfill their assignments. The famous statement, "My dog ate my homework," that kind of thing. It's so prevalent. So yes, I have faced that many times with and so the question is, I liked your idea that part of the problem is there's this intuitive belief, apparently inbred in us very early, that if I do actually accept my accountability, that I failed in my accountability, I'm going to be punished. And that's reinforced in so many ways in the places we work and serve. Many, I think, HR departments have files on the employees, right? And if someone doesn't do the right thing, someone writes them up and sticks it in their file, right? And that kind of thing. And many people are fearful for their annual evaluation type thing. Mm-hmm. We tried to change that at Heritage, where I was, that I tried to model it at the highest level, that once we had agreed as a team that what each of us was responsible for to advance the strategic plan, I, as the president, became responsible to bring the resources to the individual person, so they could be successful. So that if the person did not succeed, it was my responsibility, not theirs. I had not done what I had committed to. And, it changed it radically. The conversations are different, the opportunities to meet and talk. I used to always say to them, if at the end of the year, the half year, the full year, when you get your evaluation, if you have not done well, that's my responsibility. This should not be a surprise to you. We've had these conversations all through the years. I've done my very best. And if you still haven't performed, it's because you deliberately did not want to. It's not because you didn't have the resources to do it. And I don't know. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I think yeah. Turning it on its head so that the leader takes responsibility for all those people that flow down from his position, for their success in an ongoing, measurable way. It does help. And one last thing I'll say, and that is I've worked with a number of organizations in some of the countries in Africa, which generally have a very interesting model of leadership. It's a very top down, very centered at the very top, makes the decision. And there's one denomination that I'm working with. I mean, they've got like 9,000 churches and over 9 million baptized members. And yet some of the simplest decisions have to go right to the top before the person down here can be approved to do something. So I think the kind of leadership model in the organization is part of the problem too with accountability. You got to flatten the organization down. And anyway, these are just some thoughts. Yeah.
Those are great thoughts, Marvin. I love the idea of flattening the organization and enabling through accountability, healthy delegation of responsibilities and seeing how the organization can flourish and get unchained and unshackled by doing that. I think that's terrific. The other thing is that you mentioned about, most organizations have HR files and they write you up if you make a mistake, right? Wouldn't it be crazy if you were in an organization and somebody said, I really appreciate that you did something amazing. I'm going to write you up and put it in your file. And so HR files actually became balanced with what people did amazingly well and not just what they screwed up on.
Well, it would transform the atmosphere in the organization, no question.
I have an exercise I do with a lot of my clients, which is called catching them doing something right. For a lot of leaders, it's a tough thing to do. And I challenge them to say, once a day, find somebody making an effort to do something the right way and praise them for it. And it starts to change the culture quite dramatically.
But to do that, Pete, the person has to be a walk around person. You can't sit in your office and find those things happening. Would you agree with that?
Oh yes. You can't, once the culture starts, people will start to wander into their office and say, hey, I just saw somebody else doing something great and you probably should say something. You got to start off at least by wandering around a lot, paying attention to people and not just the reports you get on your desk.
I found it really interesting, Marvin, when you were talking there about when you were at Heritage and talking about if the person didn't succeed, and how you were involved with the resourcing. It made me think about that part of your presentation, Pete, when you were talking about joint accountability. And I had jotted down actually in my notes when I was listening to you about joint accountability and having the courage to do something together that you may not have had the courage to do alone. And it just seemed to really fit together, and thinking, there's your teamwork and there's sort of that joint accountability coming through and what Marvin was speaking about. And it seems like it would be something that would be just a very successful model where you have a senior manager, maybe an employee. And if you take that approach, it becomes more of a joint accountability, right? That you have your joint accountability with those two people if the approach that's taken is framed that way. Absolutely.
And isn't that a beautiful thought, though, that you now are working together for your overall mutual success, but the success of the mission of the organization.
Right.
It's not about trying to figure out, how to step away and from accountability and find somebody else to blame for stuff that goes wrong. Man, that is such a toxic culture that I see in so many organizations.
I would think it would add maybe some motivation too, right? Motivation for both. Yeah. Motivation for the person who has the task at hand, knowing that the other person has their back and is there for support, but also not just working for their own, maybe not just working for having been told that this is the task at hand, but that there's a joint responsibility, or that they're working for with the other person.
Have you ever, Carrie, experienced a situation where that was the truth?
You mean it where, yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I could say it from personal experience. I did feel if I was, I'm not sure if I would go that far, but I know that situations where I've had a task at hand where I have been working cooperatively or jointly with someone as opposed to just on my own, it definitely adds a different element, right? And it's like you said, Pete, it's that confidence and that courage. I think that just having that second person to be on board and that level of support can really add a lot to elements of like confidence and courage and motivation.
It is very transformative. And if you haven't had a chance to do it and create that environment, I highly encourage you. I'll give you a little story about when I was working with Canadian Tire, and we had a very large project we had to do, and I was in charge of it. And, you know, as a contract, you know, a project executive, you get what you get. You don't get to make a lot of choices. So they assigned me about 5 different organizations to work with, and it was a huge project. All of them were mutual competitors. All of them were well known to be backbiters in the organization and set each other up for failure on a regular basis. Knowing that, which is not unusual, by the way, in a lot of organizations. So, you know, we started off with a kickoff meeting where we brought all the organizations and all the 5 different organizations, plus the people within Canadian Tire that I was working with, all in a room, and with the senior executive team. So the senior vice president from Canadian Tire, the operations director of operations for the Mark's Work Warehouse division that we're working in, and a couple of the senior executives, and all of them came in to say, this is an important project and we need you all to work together. And then I stood up in front of them and said, and we will work together. I said, our theme is going to be for this project, one team, one win. And if any of you decide that you're not part of the one team, you're going to have a serious problem to deal with. And they all were quite quiet about that and went, who's this guy talking, right? And so most of them kind of got on board. The worst of them was within about a week, somebody couldn't get done what they were supposed to get done that week because another organization was deliberately withholding information and resources. They were going, oh, we're busy, we got other things to do, but that's what they were doing. So I hauled them both into my office and I sat them both down and I said, this ends now. If you don't help your colleague here, I will hold you both accountable for the failure, and it will be visible all the way up to the top of Canadian Tire of who's doing this. And I said, so I need you to stop now. Otherwise, this will be unpleasant for all of you. We are all in one team. And that rippled through through that whole organization. We had a couple of small issues for a couple of weeks afterwards, and they all started to kind of fall in line. Now, at the end of the project, it was a highly successful project because they actually worked together as a team. The thing that shifted is they were all working with each other and could count on each other to do what they needed them to do. And they knew that the other one was not out to trip them up. At the end of the project, we had a project wrap-up dinner that Canadian Tire sponsored. And the most beautiful thing was everybody from all 5 teams arrived. They all sat in different tables with their new friends. There weren't company tables. There were tables of people who had worked together closely and had developed good relationships with each other. And almost came up to me at one point in time of the night and said, that was an amazing experience. When's the next project? That's what can happen when you stop this negative, toxic culture and you start to move into a positive perspective of, accountability and joint success and a joint mission. Mm-hmm. So Carrie, if you haven't had a chance to create one of those, I highly encourage you to just go ahead and do it. It's an amazing thing to do. And most people don't push back any more than much less than you think they would.
To what degree do you believe intentionality is the flip side of accountability? And what I mean by that is if people do not know intentionally expected of them, how can they be held accountable? My history of watching this is so many people are not clear on what really is required. And I often use the illustration of a father saying to his child, I want you to go into your room and clean your room. Well, that means a lot of different things to the father and to the child, right? There's no clarity unless that father has gone in and showed him what he means by that. And then maybe practices it with him and then observes him and praises all the things. And I think so much of what creates problems in our organizations is we expect that the person knows what we're thinking when we are talking about accountability, and it's not very clear. So that's just another thought.
Marvin, I agree with you 100%. That's a really, really good point to bring up, that if you're going to ask somebody to take on a mission and accountability, that you have to be clear as to what that is. And, using your example about cleaning the room, there's kind of two ways to do it. One of them is show them how to make a bed, show them how to put away their stuff, how to stack, you can show them all that. But I think the other thing is really important is at the end of showing is to say, this is the outcome I want. Because often what we can do is, if somebody doesn't know how to do it, then we actually have to set them up by success by mentoring them and coaching them and providing them the education to do it. When they do know it, and in lots of organizations, we hire some really smart people and with great backgrounds in education and experience. And I think the one piece that's missing in those situations is what you said at the beginning, which was what's expected. What's the outcome that we want them to achieve? And being very clear about that and not vague. I think that's really important. And I also think in a lot of organizations, the people that are asking for other people to be accountable have no idea what they're asking for. And that's another problem.
Right. I totally agree with that. I agree with that totally. Anyway, that's another subject.
Yeah. Don, I think that's another webinar.
Yeah, it sounds like it is. Bob, you haven't had too much of a chance to speak. Did anything come to your mind on this topic?
Oh, I could probably give you a dozen examples of. I spent 25 years in the construction and engineering design industry, and I saw the extremes. And it was interesting that, when you're working with external contractors trying to get a project done, and trying to work with a contractor that does not want accountability, they're trying to blame everybody else. They're trying to use every excuse in the book to get change orders to pad their bottom line, and versus the contractors who are accountable and are willing to step up when they make a mistake. Those people were the guys guys and women that you always went back to project after project, and the people who complained and whined and just, to take you every time didn't last long as contractors in our business anyway. So there is a definite business advantage to being accountable in my mind, because it will create trusting relationships with people who will value the fact that you're willing to be accountable. And I agree also with the idea that you have to create a very strong definition of expectations, because that is the framework for accountability that you have to use to judge whether people are doing their job or not.
Yeah, and I love the connection between accountability and trust building, because there definitely is a strong connection between those two.
Well, it goes in both directions too, right? If you are leading someone else and you create a very strong accountability framework for them, it becomes so much easier for trust to be built between you, because you have something to hold them accountable to, but you can also help them get back on track when you see them starting to stray off the edges a little bit.
Absolutely. Well put.
Well, thank you, folks. This has been great. Thank you, particularly Pete, for your presentation. You've obviously sparked some great conversation. Like you say, we could easily go another half hour to an hour on this, but obviously we can't. So I trust that for those of you who are listening online following this presentation, that your thoughts have been stimulated as much as ours have been. Pete has been really good at putting together some discussion questions, accountability questions, and when the post email goes out, those 8 questions I'll send it along to cause you to think even further in detail around the subject of accountability. So thanks again. Remember, next month we'll be dealing with the subject of vision with Jen Pohl of Digital Consultants. I trust we'll see you then. In the meantime, God bless you all and have a great day and week and month ahead. Bye for now.